How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday, Yom Shlishi. Let's light up the darkness. How are we doing? Great to be learning with you on a Tuesday, Yom Shlishi. Let us be lighting up the darkness. Who's in the house? On a Tuesday, Paul in the Great Northwest, Joseph in Sierra Nevada, Bill in Missouri, Shandora in the Bronx, Joe in the Inland Empire, Stephen in New Hampshire, Bella in Florida, Lucy in Minnesota, Yehuda in South Carolina, Nancy, North Carolina, Guy in Ohio, Melissa in Great Neck, Bill, the audio's funky. There we go. Very good. Okay. Also Chaim in Florida, Yisrael in Philly, Aoife in Florida, Ella in Southern California, Frank in San Pedro, Lorraine in Waco, Texas, and my friend wants to see the film in Winnipeg. LOL. God willing, we'll get there. Right? Everyone's asking, what about the cities that aren't already on the confirmed week 1 list? Please God, we will succeed. I was on a show this morning. It's called Flyover Conservatives, a Christian show who are just really taken with our movie and with Accidental Talmudists and everything that we do, learning here. They really take Genesis 12:3 seriously, that God blesses those who bless the children of Abraham. And they're just so supportive of the movie, and they were telling their audience, I was on for an hour, and they must have said gunsandmosesmovie.com 30 times. And everyone in our audience, they said to their audience, you have to share this website with 5 friends. If it's me asking people to do that, I almost feel like, okay, you must be sick of me talking about our movie. This is not people that have anything to do with our movie except that they believe in it. They love they haven't seen the movie. They've seen the trailer. They've seen a lot of supporting materials. They've read about it. They've talked to me. Now I've been on the show twice for an hour each time. And they just believe so strongly in what we're doing. They said to their audience, you got to share the website with 5 friends and tell them to share it with 5 friends. And if it's not opening in a city where you are, buy a ticket anyway and send it to somebody who is in one of those cities and support the movie. Make sure it opens on opening weekend so that we can get to more cities in week 2. I'm just reporting what David and Stacy said. They're a married couple like Nina and I are, mom and pop shop, what they said on their show, Flyover Conservatives. And I was just so moved by that. Okay, and that's why my microphone was arranged for a different kind of programming. I have to switch computers, switch mics, switch everything when I do these interviews. Okay, where are we? Our daf today is page 29, but we pick it up at the bottom of 28b, or actually more like halfway down 28b. Continuing our discussion of Mishna number 3 here in chapter 2, which God willing, we are going to complete. So we're going to continue the discussion we were in yesterday about some of the medicinal practices of the Talmudic era. This was in the context of, do we accept medical treatment from an idolater because they're suspected of bloodshed and they might use the opportunity that we're already ill to kill us, right? That was the state of the community back then. There was just, animosity and danger from the surrounding idolaters around the Jewish community. But once we started talking about medicine, we got deeper into some medicinal practices of the era. And some of this is fascinating. I know there was some debate in the comments yesterday about whether such cures could really be efficacious. And I say I would not put anything past our sages. They certainly didn't have the science that is available to us today. But nothing got into this book without it was the subject of trial and error and use in the real world, in real communities for many generations. I'm sure there was some amount of placebo effect, some amount of feeling like you're now doing something and someone is caring for you. And while you're trying these different cures, some time is passing, and that might have something to do with it. But I'm sure there's also something to these natural remedies. Now, the Gemara returns to the issue of medical treatment on Shabbos. General rule, we don't do medical treatment on Shabbos unless it's to save life. I mean, in other words, medical treatment on Shabbos, the problem with it, especially in the ancient world, is that it probably meant, grinding herbs, compounding herbs, which would definitely be a violation, a desecration of Shabbos. To save a life, we'll desecrate Shabbos any which way. But if it's just a question of discomfort, okay, so you can wait until Shabbos is over. And then there's those liminal cases where is it really life-threatening or not? If it might be life-threatening, we'll desecrate Shabbos. But if it's definitely not life-threatening, but there's a great degree of discomfort, there's going to be some mixed opinions. And for any of these kinds of questions, especially in the modern world, you got to ask your local Orthodox rabbi. Okay, the Gemara returns to the issue of medical treatment on Shabbos. Rabbi Bar Zutra says that Rabbi Hanina says one may raise his ears to their appropriate position. Raise his ears to their appropriate position. What's he talking about? Somebody who dislocated his jaw, and they're going to move the jaw back into place. So he says he may do that on Shabbos, set the dislocated jaw. Rav Shmuel Bar Yehuda teaches this applies only if one raises it by hand, but not by means of medicine. There are those who say the opposite. One may raise his ears by means of medicine, but not by hand. What is the reason that one may not naturally raise the ear, right? Meaning raise the jaw. It is because doing so might injure the ear, which would constitute a violation of Torah law, whereas applying medicine is a violation of rabbinic law, right? Not treating, if you're grinding for sure, that violates Shabbos, but even if you're not grinding, as a rabbinic ordinance, we don't do that on Shabbos, absent life-threatening circumstances, because you might come to violate Shabbos on a biblical level, right? Now, this is interesting. If you're going to create an injury, right? Obviously, there's no bloodletting on Shabbos. That's not something that's going to be life-saving, and that causes an injury. Why is causing an injury something that violates Shabbos on a biblical level? Drawing blood, which is similar to slaughtering. Slaughtering animals for meat eating. Those are activities we do not do on Shabbos. So causing a wound, even for medicinal purposes, would desecrate Shabbos. We wouldn't do it unless it was for a life-threatening situation. And so therefore, if there's a risk of injuring the ear, we don't do it because it could violate the Shabbos on a biblical level. Rav Zutra Bartovia says that Rav says, with regard to an eye that rebelled. What an interesting phrase. What is an eye that rebelled? A rebellious eye. This is not a political perspective. A rebellious eye is an eye that is out of its place. And that, could become dislocated from the eye socket. This sounds truly terrible. So with regard to an eye that rebelled, i.e., which is apt to pop out of its socket, it is permitted to apply blue eyeshadow to it on Shabbos. This is not makeup. This is some kind of a medicinal treatment. And the sages initially concluded from this that this statement applies only where one had already ground the ingredients yesterday, i.e. on Shabbos, on Erev Shabbos, on Friday. But if he planned to grind them on Shabbos or to bring them through a public domain, it would not be permitted, as this would constitute a desecration of Shabbos by Torah law. Now, to dispel this notion, one of the sages named Rabbi Yaakov said to them, this matter was explained to me by Rabbi Yehuda, who said that even if he plans to grind the ingredients on Shabbos and carry it through a public domain, which would be desecrating Shabbos, it is permitted, because to set an eye back into its socket is a degree. Now the question is it life-threatening? An eye that's popping out of its socket, is that actually life-threatening or is it vision-threatening? Right? Now obviously we would all say, oh my God, like if there's a chance he's going to lose his vision or lose an eye, we'll do anything to save that. But if the law has been expressed as only for life-threatening things, that's why they're saying, well, maybe it can wait until after Shabbos. But here comes Rabbi Yaakov, who says, absolutely not. You desecrate Shabbos in order to save the eye, or even to, remove the danger of that the eye will pop out of its socket. The Gemara relates that Rav Yehuda permitted someone to apply this blue eye shadow, right? This medicinal treatment for an eye that is, on the verge of popping out of the socket. Permitted someone to apply the blue eye shadow to the eye on Shabbos. And Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda said to the sages, one who adheres to the ruling of Yehuda desecrates Shabbos. Ultimately, Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda himself suffered pain in his eye. And he sent a message to Rav Yehuda asking, is it permitted or prohibited for me to treat my eye on Shabbos? Right? The one who had said that this is not permitted, now when he's having the pain himself, sends a message to the one who said it was permitted, can I do it? Now he knows that the other one has said it's permitted in the past. Why is he not just relying on that ruling? He knows that he himself has said that it's prohibited. So now he wants to get confirmation of what? That he who has said it was prohibited can change course now that he's in pain. He sent a message to Rav Yehuda asking, is it permitted or prohibited for me to treat my eye on Shabbos? And Rav Yehuda sent back to him, for everyone else, it is permitted. But for you, it is prohibited. As you treated my lenient ruling with disdain. Now Rav Yehuda continues, but was it... And Rav Yehuda, the one who was the lenient opinion and now is saying to Rav Shmuel bar Yehuda that you can't do this. So Rav Yehuda continues, but was it of my own accord that I issued my lenient ruling? It is the ruling of Mar Shmuel, as demonstrated in an incident. There was a certain maidservant who was in the house of Mar Shmuel, whose eye became infected on Shabbos, and she screamed in pain, but there was no one who attended to her. So eventually her eye popped out of the socket. And the next day, Mar Shmuel went out and taught, right? In other words, taught to the community, with regard to an eye that rebelled, it is permitted to apply the blue eye shadow to it on Shabbos. And what is the reason for this leniency, seeing as one may desecrate Shabbos only to treat life-threatening afflictions, and this is vision-threatening, pain-inducing, but not life-threatening. So the reason is that the tendons of the eye are dependent upon the valves of the heart. He's saying that a damage to the eye like this is life-threatening. So the Gemara asks, what ailment of the eye, for example, is considered life-threatening? And Rav Yehuda said, for example, any of the following. Abnormal discharge, the sensation of pricking, blood flow from the eye, excessive tearing, inflammation, and the onset of infection. Okay, now they have brought that list of dangerous situations, much closer to what we might have expected. Your eye doesn't have to be on the, about to pop out of the socket before you can apply treatment on Shabbos. Basically anything that's going on with your eye that is truly abnormal, not just, some pollen in the air making it tear, but if something really abnormal is happening and there's a treatment for it, we do it on Shabbos according to this view. This list serves to exclude the final stages of a waning infection that is mostly healed, and the opening of the eye, i.e. treatment administered to improve one's eyesight, which are not life-threatening, and therefore one is not permitted to treat them on Shabbos. But any of these other conditions we do. Rav Yehuda says, with regard to one who suffers from the sting of a hornet, or the prick of a thorn, or an abscess, or one whose eye pains him, or one overcome by a fever, bathing in a bathhouse is a life-threatening danger for all of these. Additionally, eating radish is good for a fever, and eating beets is good for chills. But the reverse, eating radish for chills or beets for a fever, that poses a danger. Similarly, eating hot foods is good for the sting of a scorpion, and cold foods are good for a hornet sting, but the reverse poses a danger. Hot water is good for a thorn embedded in one's skin, and cold water is good for facial wounds, but the reverse presents a danger. How fortunate are we that when you have to look up these kinds of things at home before you can get medical advice, there's the internet. Now, there's a lot of mixed information on the internet, but presumably if you go to some reputable medical site just for basic questions, you don't have to memorize all this kind of stuff. In the ancient world, if you didn't know somebody who knew these kinds of things, let's just take it as a given for a moment that all of this is true. It's scary, right? Now, how many people are actually going to remember that at the moment of an emergency? Thank God we live in a world with an internet. Now we're on page 29a. Vinegar is good for one to consume after bloodletting, and eating small fish is good for one who has completed a fast. But the reverse is a danger. Eating cress and then undergoing bloodletting poses a danger. With regard to one who suffers from a fever and undergoes bloodletting, this poses a danger to his life. Don't have a bloodletter touch you when you have a fever. Similarly, one who suffers from pain of the eye and undergoes bloodletting endangers his life. On the second day after eating fish, one may go to a bloodletter, and on the second day after letting blood, one may eat fish. With regard to eating fish on the third day after letting blood, or letting blood on the third day after eating fish, both of these actions pose a danger. Now, the Gemara presents a series of health-related statements. The sages taught one who lets blood may not eat the following foods corresponding to the acronym Hes Gimel Beis Shin. That is, he may consume neither milk, nor cheese, nor onions, nor cress. And if he ate one of these, Abaye said he should bring a quarter lug of vinegar and a quarter lug of wine and mix them together and drink the mixture. And when he defecates, he should defecate only toward the east of the city, because the odor of the excrement after the treatment is offensive. Since the wind does not usually blow from the east, it is less likely to spread the stench. It's not that he has to defecate in a certain direction because it will affect his health. It's because so he won't harm, other people with the stench of, his post-treatment number 2. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi says one may lift the unkali on Shabbos, and the Gemara asks, what is unkali? And Rabbi Abba said it is the edge of the ribs, istumcha, near the heart, which sometimes bend inward, in which case they must be lifted and straightened into their proper position. And the Gemara asks, what is the cure for one whose unkali has been bent? He should take cumin, caraway, mint, wormwood, satureja, I don't know what that word is, and hyssop. The remedy is beneficial for several ailments, and the Gemara presents each of these in turn. For curing the heart, the above combination should be taken with wine, and your mnemonic for this is the verse, and wine that makes glad the heart of man, from Psalm 104. For curing an ailment that arises due to the wind, one drinks the mixture in water, and your mnemonic is, and the spirit, ruach, of God hovered over the face of the waters. And for childbirth, a woman in labor drinks the mixture with beer, and your mnemonic for this is, with her pitcher upon her shoulders, and, sort of the punning aspect of this in Hebrew will help you remember it. Rav Acha, the son of Rava, ground all these together and took a handful of the mixture and drank it. And Rav Ashi ground each and every one of the herbs separately, and he took all that he could hold between his large finger and his small finger and drank it. And Rav Papa said, I tried all these remedies and I was not healed, until a certain Arab said to me, bring a new jug and fill it with water and place in it a ladle of honey that is suspended among the stars, i.e., add the ladle at night, and drink it on the next day. And Rav Papa concludes, I did this and I was healed. The sages taught 6 items heal a sick person from his illness, and their cure is a permanent cure. Okay, this is good. 6 items heal a sick person from his illness, and their cure is a permanent cure. And these are cabbage, beets, water, and dried chamomile. Water in which dried chamomile was soaked. Sounds like chamomile tea. And the stomach contents of an animal, and the womb of an animal, and the lobe of the liver. Eat your chicken liver. And some say small fish are also included in this list. And moreover, eating small fish causes a person's entire body to flourish and to grow. Small fish, not large fish. 10 items return a sick person to his illness, and his illness becomes even more severe than it originally was. And they are one who eats ox meat, fat, roasted meat, bird meat, and a roasted egg, and cress, and the act of shaving and bathing, and the consumption of cheese and liver. Apparently, you don't do these when you're sick. And some say nuts are also included in this list. And some say cucumbers are also included in this. And the school of Rabbi Yishmael taught, why are they called cucumbers, kishuin? Because they are as harmful, kashin, to a person's entire body as swords. Not when you're normal and healthy, but when you're sick, then these foods can pose a danger. And interesting, a lot of these foods, when you're sick, you don't really feel like eating heavy, meaty dishes, right? It's because your body is telling you that this is not what you need right now. The Mishnah teaches, and one may not have his hair... Okay, we're back to our Mishnah and the idea of the danger posed to Jews by the idolaters who are committing idolatry, who are committing violence, who are committing forbidden sexual practices, etc. The Mishnah taught, and one may not have his hair cut by idolaters anywhere. And the sages taught in a Baraisa, a Jew who has his hair cut by an idolater should observe the idolater's actions in a mirror while he cuts his hair. And in the case of an idolater who has his hair cut by a Jew, when the Jew reaches the idolater's forelock, he removes his hand and does not cut it because it is associated with idol worship. Right? Very interesting that the idolaters, that forelock, I don't know if just removing it was the act of worship, of idol worship, or cutting it so that they have it and would use it, maybe sacrifice it to idolatry. Either way, the Jew, who is permitted to give a haircut to an idolater, because this forelock is associated with a practice of idolatry, the Jew is not permitted to cut that part of the idolater's hair. The master said, a Jew who has his hair cut by an idolater should observe the idolater's actions in a mirror, right? So that he doesn't, kill you with the razor that he's using to cut your hair or stab you with the scissors. So what are the circumstances? If it is referring to a haircut performed in a public domain, why do I need a mirror? After all, the idolater will not harm a Jew in public. And if it occurs in a private domain, well then, even if the Jew is observing the idolater's actions in a mirror, what of it? How does the fact that the Jew is watching prevent the idolatrous barber from harming him? And the Gemara explains, actually, this is referring to a haircut in a private domain. But since there is a mirror in place, the Jew appears as an important person, whom the idolater will hesitate to attack. That's interesting, that the mirror is present when it's an important person, but not otherwise. Is this? I guess the Jew is bringing a mirror. Having a mirror there is not standard operating procedure for the barbers. Very interesting. And the Gemara relates a relevant incident. Rav Chana bar Bizna was having his hair cut by an idolater in one of the side streets of Nehardea. So here, we're not talking about Rome. Nehardea is in Bavel, which is part of the Persian Empire in this period. The barber said to him, Chana, your throat is appealing to the razor. Right? Oh, I'm kind of tempted to kill you, is what he's saying. Rav Chana bar Bizna said, I have this coming to me, as I violated the ruling of Rabbi Meir, who stated that one may not have his hair cut by an idolater in any location. And now he sees why. Presumably the guy did not kill him, or the story would have noted that. But he realized that he was in danger, and the barber even said so. The Gemara asks, and didn't Rav Chana bar Bizna violate the ruling of the rabbis as well, not just the minority ruling of Rabbi Meir? Say that when the rabbis stated that it is permitted to have one's hair cut by an idolater, they were referring to a haircut performed in a public domain, right, where there's lots of witnesses. But with regard to a haircut performed in a private domain, did they say that was permitted? Perhaps they would agree with Rabbi Meir on that. Since the side streets of Nehardea cannot be considered a public domain, evidently Rav Chana bar Bizna violated the ruling of the rabbis as well. So the Gemara explains, and Rav Chana bar Bizna maintains, with regard to the side streets of Nehardea, since many people are present there, it is similar to a public domain, and it would therefore be permitted to have one's hair cut there, according to the opinion of the rabbis. But it sounds like Rabbi Chana Bar Bizna now is going to be an adherent of Rabbi Meir's position. The Baraisa stated, and in the case of an idolater who has his hair cut by a Jew, when the Jew reaches the idolater's forelock, he removes his hand and does not cut it, because that is associated with idolatry. So the Gemara asks, and how much space should the Jew leave around the forelock? And Rav Makiya says that Rav Adabar Ahava says 3 finger breadths in each and every direction. In addition to Rav Malkiya, whose ruling was just cited, there was another Amora known as Rav Malkiyu. Right? So there was Rav Malkiya and Rav Malkiyu. So in order to avoid confusing the two, the Gemara records their respective ruling, which is nothing, we're just getting the names straight, but that doesn't necessarily have to do anything with what we're doing. Rav Chanina, the son of Rav Ika, says the statements concerning a skewer, maidservants, and follicles were issued by Rav Malkiyu, and the ruling concerning a forelock, burnt ashes, and cheese were stated by Rav Malkiya. Rav Papa said a different opinion. Statements from the Mishna and Baraisa were issued by Rav Malkiya, whereas rulings of halacha that are not related to a Mishna or Baraisa were taught by Rav Malkiyu. And the mnemonic to remember the difference between them is this. The Mishnah is a queen, Malketa, i.e., the statements that are referring to a Mishnah were made by Rav Malkiya, whose name is similar to the Aramaic term for queen. And the Gemara asks, what is the difference between the opinions of Rav Chanina and Rav Papa? And the Gemara answers, there's a difference between them with regard to the law concerning maidservants. According to Rav Chanina, the law was stated by Rav Malkiyu, whereas Rav Papa holds that it was taught by Rav Malkiya, as it is referring to a dispute in a Mishnah. And with that, we conclude our discussion of Mishnah number 3, here in chapter 2 of Tractate Avoda Zara. Now we're on page 29b, and we open Mishnah number 4 of chapter 2. This Mishnah discusses the halakhic status, the legal status of various items that belong to idolaters. These are items that belong to idolaters and are prohibited to Jews. And their prohibition is that of an item from which deriving benefit is prohibited. Right? So they're making a careful distinction here between 2 levels of prohibition. Right? So for example, it could be, I'm not saying what the ruling is, but it could be that non-kosher wine, that is something that a Jew is not permitted to drink clearly. But can a Jew buy a non-kosher bottle of wine and resell it for a profit? You know, buy it in one locale where it's selling at a good price, and then take it to another locale where it's rare, not easily found, and mark it up and sell it for a profit. In this case, he would be benefiting from this non-kosher wine, but not consuming it. So in some cases, there's a prohibition on consumption and benefit. In other cases, there's a prohibition on consumption, but benefit is permitted. That's the difference. Right, so these are items that belong to the idolaters, which are prohibited to Jews, and their prohibition is that of an item from which deriving benefit is also prohibited. And what are these? Wine and vinegar belonging to idolaters that was wine and vinegar belonging to idolaters that was originally wine, right? Vinegar made from wine. Those would both be prohibited both for consumption and for benefit. And hadrianic earthenware. What's hadrianic earthenware? These are clay vessels that were used for drinking liquids, but that would absorb the taste of that liquid. The problem with wine, generally speaking, is that the idolaters might have used that wine as a libation in performing idolatry and bowing to their idol and pouring some of this wine over the idol or in front of the idol. So it was something used in the process of idolatry, and that's why Jews cannot drink any wine of idolaters, even if they don't know that it was used in idolatry, because it might have been used in idolatry. Therefore, that that gets extended to vinegar that is made from the wine of idolaters, or earthenware vessels that might have held the wine of idolaters. And hides, right, like cow hides, with a tear opposite the heart. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel says a hide is prohibited only when the tear around its heart is circular, but if it is elongated, it is permitted, as the idolaters will sacrifice a heart to their idol only when it has been removed by a circular laceration. If there's a circular laceration around the hide, then you know that they went in, took the heart, and used it as a sacrificial object for idolatry. If they don't have that kind of an incision, it wasn't used for that. Meat that enters the house of idolatry is permitted, and meat that exits this house is prohibited, because it is considered as offerings to the dead, i.e. to the idols. And this is the statement of Rabbi Akiva. With regard to those going to a festival of idolatry, it is prohibited to engage in a business deal with them. And with regard to those who are coming from it, it is permitted to engage in business with them. Right? If they're going toward the festival idolatry and you do business with them, this is like the first Mishna that we had in this tractate, they might celebrate that they did a good deal and then offer additional offerings to their idol. When they're coming away from the festival, well, they already did their idolatry. Now you can do business with them. Wine skins and jugs belonging to idolaters which have a Jew's wine contained in them become prohibited to the Jews. And their prohibition is that of an item from which deriving benefit is prohibited. Again, this sounds like the earthenware vessels that absorb some of the flavor of the wine, and if that wine was used for idolatry, we can't take the chance. This is a statement of Rabbi Meir. And the rabbis say their prohibition is not that of an item from which deriving benefit is prohibited. You can't drink wine of idolaters ever, but if your wine was contained in the skin, right, a wine skin of an idolater, that's not going to automatically disqualify your wine. Residual grape seeds and grape skins belonging to idolaters, which are left behind after the grapes are crushed for wine, are prohibited, and their prohibition is that of an item from which deriving benefit is prohibited. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir, the more stringent opinion, and the rabbis say moist grape residues are prohibited, but dry grape residues are permitted. Fish stew and cheese of Beit Unyaki belonging to idolaters, these are prohibited, and their prohibition is that of an item from which deriving benefit is prohibited. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir, and the rabbis say their prohibition is not that of one from which benefit is prohibited. Rav Yehuda said that Rabbi Yishmael asked Rabbi Yehoshua a series of questions while they were traveling along the road. And Rabbi Yishmael said to him, "For what reason did the sages prohibit the cheeses of the idolaters?" And Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, "Because the idolaters curdle their cheese with the stomach contents of unslaughtered animal carcass. And as the carcass of an unslaughtered animal is not kosher, cheese that is curdled with it likewise is prohibited." And by the way, that is still true today, right? Jews who are observant only eat kosher cheese. And what's the difference between kosher cheese and non-kosher cheese? Number one, it has been supervised in all of its manufacturing and production, under rabbinic supervision, so that it should not come into contact with anything that is not kosher. And what specifically are we guarding against with regard to cheese is rennet, right? Rennet, which is an animal product that would be extracted even from a kosher animal, but that kosher animal was not slaughtered in a kosher manner, right? That's a nevela. A kosher animal that was not shechted, right, that was not slaughtered in a kosher manner, that's known as a nevela. A Jew is not permitted to eat it. It is not kosher meat, even though it comes from a kosher animal. And likewise, you can't use cheese that is curdled using products from that nevela. In response, Rabbi Yishmael said to him, "But aren't the stomach contents of burnt offerings subject to a more stringent prohibition than the stomach contents of a nevela?" And yet they said a priest who is open-minded with regard to what he eats may swallow the stomach contents of a burnt offering while they are raw. And the other sages did not agree with him. But the sages said one may not derive benefit from the stomach contents of a burnt offering ab initio, and if one did derive benefit from them, he is not liable for misusing consecrated property. Right? This is very interesting, because in a burnt offering, that was when the temple was standing, this was a sacrifice that was brought, and the entire animal was consumed on the altar. This is as opposed to a sin offering, where part of that animal was given as a gift to the priest serving in the temple, and it was permitted for them to eat it. It was, one of the benefits of being a priest in the temple. So I'm not sure what's going on here. The stomach contents of a burnt offering. And maybe there are some parts of a burnt offering that are discarded before that animal is brought up, but I thought it was burnt entirely on the altar, so I need to do a little bit of research. But let's just keep reading. But the sages said one may not derive benefit from the stomach contents of a burnt offering. Ab initio, you can't. But if one did derive benefit from them, he is not liable for hekdesh, misusing consecrated property, or meila. So according to both opinions, deriving benefit from the stomach contents of a burnt offering is not prohibited by Torah law. Since the law with regard to a burnt offering is more stringent than that of a nevela, an unslaughtered animal carcass, why would deriving benefit from the carcass be prohibited while deriving benefit from the burnt offering, even though you're not supposed to do it, it's not prohibited on a biblical level? And Rabbi Yehoshua said to Rabbi Yishmael, the cheeses of the idolaters is prohibited because they curdle it in the stomach, contents of calves that are not just the calves of idolaters, but the calves that are used in idolatry. Not just calves that were not slaughtered in a kosher manner and therefore nevela, but calves that may have actually been used in Avoda Zara, in idolatry. Since it is prohibited to derive benefit from such calves, cheese curdled in their stomach contents is also prohibited. Rabbi Yishmael said to him, if that is so, why didn't the sages prohibit deriving any benefit from the cheese instead of merely prohibiting its consumption? But if the problem is that it's nevela, then that's why it's not kosher, we can't eat it. But it was never used for idolatry, and that's why it's permitted to benefit from it. Like you could, buy and sell it, you just can't eat it. If there's a chance that the rennet or whatever, the product from the animal product that was used to curdle the cheese came from an animal that was used for idolatry, then this cheese should also not be permitted for benefit. So instead of answering this question, Rabbi Yishmael changed the subject. And this is recorded in the Mishna, right? Unusual. Usually these kinds of stories only come up in the Gemara. But here's one recorded in the Mishna. Instead of answering Rabbi Yishmael, Rabbi Yehoshua diverted his attention to another matter and said to him, Yishmael, how do you read the following verse in the Song of Songs? Chapter 1, verse 2. Do you read it as, for your love is better than wine, where your love is dodecha? Or do you read it as, for your love dodayich, right? The letters, the Dalet, Yud, Dalet, final Ches, these are all the same letters, but the vowelization would be the difference between masculine and feminine. And so in the Song of Songs, if you're talking to a male, that's Israel talking to God. But if you're talking to a female, that's God talking to Israel. Right? That's the convention of how we've learned to interpret Song of Songs. So therefore, do you read it as, for your love, masculine, is better than wine, meaning Israel saying that when God loves us, that is better than anything, right? Even the wine, which is such a treat. Or for your love, feminine, is better than wine, meaning that God is saying, that he appreciates so much when the children of Israel show love in return. So this phrase, which appears in the next verse, is written in the masculine form. So then the answer comes. So do you read it as, like I said? And Rabbi Yishmael said to him, it should be read in the feminine, right? Meaning that it's God speaking to the Jewish people. For your love is better than wine, God appreciating the love of the Jewish people. And Rabbi Yehoshua said to him, the matter is not so. As another verse teaches with regard to it, your ointments have a goodly fragrance, ointments shemanecha, and that is in the masculine, and it's the next verse. And therefore, since it's written in the masculine form, it indicates that the preceding verse should be vowelized in the masculine form, since we're not changing the speaker in this dialogue. And therefore, it's the Jewish people saying to God, when we feel your love, that is a bigger intoxicant, a sweeter feeling than anything we could ever get from wine. And that concludes the Mishnah. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, get them in now as we open the Gemara on this Mishnah. From where do we derive that wine belonging to idolaters is prohibited? Rabba bar Abu says that the verse states, quote, who did eat the fat of their offerings and drank the wine of their drink offering? That's Deuteronomy 32:38. And this verse juxtaposes the fat of idolatrous sacrifices to the wine. And just as deriving benefit from their offering is prohibited, so too deriving benefit from their wine is prohibited. Again, anything that was used in idolatry, we could not consume it, nor could we ever derive benefit from it. The Gemara asks, from where do you derive the prohibition with regard to an offering itself? It is derived from a verse. As it is written, Psalm 106, verse 28, they joined themselves also onto Baal of Peor, right? That's one of these idolatrous deities, false deities, and ate the offerings to the dead. And this verse teaches that just as deriving benefit from a corpse is prohibited, so too deriving benefit from an offering of idolatry is prohibited. So the Gemara asks, and from where do we derive the prohibition of a corpse itself? Very interesting law. You cannot derive benefit from a corpse. Now think about, normally, when does that come up? It doesn't, right? If somebody dies, we do for him the true kindness, right? The chesed shalemes, which is that we bury him. It's called the true kindness because he can't return the favor. So people die, we bury their body. How would we benefit from a corpse? What comes to my mind is, the cadaver that's used for medical research. There's a lot of benefit from that dead body. Now, perhaps if it's being used to save life, it might be a different story. But, I don't know. If there was a society where they didn't respect the dead and they took their dead bodies and then, fed them to the pigs, we could not participate in that. A Jew would be prohibited in every which way from participating in such a horrible practice. So, from where do we derive the prohibition of the corpse itself? And the Gemara answers, it is derived from a verbal analogy between the words there and there, employed with regard to the heifer whose neck is broken, to absolve a city from bearing responsibility for the death of a visitor, right? The corpse that's found between two cities, murdered. We don't know who committed the murder. We don't know who the person is. Then we have to measure which is the closest city, and we do this ritual where the elders of the city come out and they say, we have to recite, these verses from the Torah that say, we don't know what happened to him. We regret that this man is dead. None of us killed him. None of us shed his blood. But we mourn because this kind of unsolved violence brings down the spiritual level of the land, and the land will not tolerate this kind of violence. And so we do the ritual of the heifer whose neck is broken. It is derived from a verbal analogy between the words there and there employed with regard to the heifer whose neck is broken, to absolve a city from bearing responsibility for the death of a visitor. It is written here, Numbers 20, verse 1, and Miriam died there. And it is written there in Numbers 21, verse 4, and the elders of that city shall bring down the heifer into a rough valley, which may neither be plowed nor sown, and shall break the heifer's neck there in the valley. So just as there, deriving benefit from the heifer is prohibited, so too here, deriving benefit from a corpse is prohibited. You can guess the next question. And there, from where do we learn that deriving benefit from the heifer is prohibited? Presumably a heifer, when we do this ritual, the heifer whose neck is broken, we have to use a heifer that was never used for work. Or certainly after its neck is broken in that ritual, we can't eat it or sell it or benefit from it. So the sages said in the school of Rabbi Yanai, a term of atonement is written with regard to the heifer whose neck is broken in Deuteronomy 21:8, just as it is written with regard to sacrificial animals. And this teaches that deriving benefit from the heifer is prohibited, just as deriving benefit from sacrificial animals is prohibited. The Gemara does not then ask, from where do we derive that deriving benefit from sacrificial animals is prohibited? Because that's stated explicitly in other areas. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll continue tomorrow at the regular Wednesday time of 6 p.m. Pacific. Now we'll take some questions and comments. Sharon. Let us remember, Botox is from snake toxins. Chemotherapy agents are often from rainforest plants. Penicillin is from mold. We just call them by their chemical terminology. I think lending support to what I said earlier, that these natural remedies certainly were efficacious, or they wouldn't have been included in the Gemara. Sharon also says current Orthodox decisions regarding transplant surgery consider eye and corneal transplants acceptable as loss of vision is considered life-threatening, i.e. one can take eyes and corneas for transplantation from the deceased without it being considered a desecration of the body because it saves life. Very good. Thank you, Sharon. Bell, I own a book that was marketed to families living on the prairie or in the West, away from professional medical care. What I was saying earlier, imagine if you had to do this stuff yourself and you didn't have the internet, you didn't have a doctor, and you didn't have a wise man, who remembered all these things. What do? Okay, so in the West, they had a book. This book has medical information and treatment for both human and animal care, along with recipes for making household necessities like soap, care for different fabrics, and recipes for food preservation. I mean, that just sounds to me like a fascinating coffee table book. You could just sit down and read that book at any time and be fascinated. Thank you, Bill. Bill, further note on the dangerous foods while sick. I noticed that several of these foods, particularly cucumbers, have a tendency to result in gas and heartburn. And the sages may be suggesting that when one is already ill, it's a bad time to make one's digestion even worse. Whew, could not agree more. And as a matter of fact, it's interesting. When I was being interviewed this morning, we were talking a little bit about something totally different, right? That people get radicalized online to hate Jews, to hate other groups. They get in these echo chambers and they keep repeating, the reasons why they hate people, or terrified of people, or angry at people, and they inculcate this kind of hatred of people they've never even met. And that when you have such an environment that is, spread out to not tens or hundreds or thousands of people, but hundreds of thousands or millions of people, then how surprised are we going to be when among that large group of people is somebody who was emotionally unstable, already, on the verge of being, a truly unstable and dangerous person. And now you feed that kind of a person all these kinds of hate lessons, and then what do? They go murder. They go do terrible things. And we were actually likening it to, I brought up this kind of idea that, a lot of us could eat foods that would give us no problem, but because our digestive system is strong. But somebody who has a delicate digestion eating the same food could have a real problem, right? And even a person who normally has a strong digestion, when he's sick, doesn't have such a strong digestive system, he's got to be really careful about what he eats, as Bill is pointing out. Thank you. Joseph, it very much is still today idolatry to pursue Jews. Even if idolatry is not the same, it still stems from a lack of God. I think what I hear you saying, right, is that people who are violently anti-Semitic and calling for the murder of Jews, which is certainly not limited, to the immediate surroundings of Israel. Now we're seeing these kinds of calls for violence in America, in big cities, on college campuses. I mean, it's just appalling what we're seeing these days. And what I find very interesting, what you're saying, Joseph, is that you're associating this with idolatry, right? That kind of hate and call for violence, sometimes in the name of God, is certainly not a worship of God and a faith that we would call legitimate. And maybe it's really more just an addiction to hate and to blaming a scapegoat for your problems and to getting caught up in the madness of crowds, which is fueled by having a common scapegoat, Now, whatever our problems are, we can all agree that guy is to blame for all our problems. And if we get rid of him, then we'll be okay. And what happens in history? They get rid of him and their problems don't go away. So they go looking for the next scapegoat. Lucy, even if an animal was slaughtered properly, using rennet to make cheese would be using meat to prepare a dairy product, just so. That would be a problem, wouldn't it? Yes, it would. Yes, it would, certainly. Kosher cheese is not made from rennet from a kosher and properly slaughtered animal. They use some other process to make it. So exactly right. And Sharon says rennet is an excretion from a cow intestine, but is not meat. Milk, too, is an excretion from a cow. Interesting. Now I'm at a loss, because I thought that kosher cheese is made without rennet, but maybe you're saying it's an enzyme that is not used from nevela, and it's not considered meat, so that it's not a milk and a meat and dairy issue. You know what? This shows how ignorant I am. I don't know the answers to these questions offhand, but I'm going to look it up now. That's what I've got for us today. And with God's help, we'll be together again tomorrow, Wednesday, at the regular Wednesday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Have a great night. And spread the word that Guns N' Moses opens Friday and even Thursday in some select locations. Spread the word about gunsandmosesmovie.com, where showtimes and tickets and the trailer are available.